for joining us. Great. So, yeah, you've heard that we are recording the session, and so the breakout rooms won't be recorded, but this section is. Please do stay on mute if you can and put any questions into the chat, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end. We can answer as we go through. And yeah, just a note to say that obviously when we do get to the breakout rooms, it'd be really nice if everybody can have a moment to speak. And so as you're going through the time and you realise that anybody in your group hasn't had a chance and would like to speak, it'd be great if everybody could be mindful and make sure that everybody can make their contribution if they would like to. Great. So I think we'll go on to the next slide, which is all about the aims of what we want to achieve in the next hour. And so we want you to be able to have a demonstration from us about how to use the features of the website, all of the different ways that you can interact with this data. We want you to be able to understand the data and then take it away with you and discuss it with peers, with your politicians, with friends, with anybody who you think could be interested with, and for you to feel empowered to use the scorecards to really understand how they've been created and what impact we think that they could have. And at the end of the day, we are looking for councils to improve their climate action ready for the next time we do this. So I think that is that. It's all about getting you to have more knowledge, confidence and skills. And so, yeah, we hope it'll be a really interesting session and 1 hour. Cool. I think I'm handing, I think we're just going to actually put a little question out to you to start with, which is, have you already engaged your local council about their climate action? We would do this as a poll, but we haven't quite sorted that one out. So today, if you've got access to the chat, could you tell us, yes, you've already engaged your council, or no? And if you could, whether you've used the scorecards in that or not, and that could be this iteration of the scorecards, which is about actions, or the previous version, which is about plans. Great, thanks, Sarah. Good to know. Just admit somebody else. Not yet, good to know. Great, we've got a good mixture in the room. Thanks for telling us, everybody. Also just admitting a few people. Welcome if you're just joining us. You might not be able to see the chat from before you've joined, but we are answering the question whether people in the room have engaged their council already about climate, and if so, have you done it with or without the scorecards? Oh, that's really interesting that Sutton engaged with you rather than the other way around. Oh, Mark is meeting some councillors on the 24th of Jan. That's amazing. And I realised I haven't really introduced myself. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I'm Julia and I work for My Society. It doesn't actually say that in my name. My Society support Climate Emergency UK in making the scorecards. We are the sort of tech people behind the website. And so we do some of the data analysis and make sure that that works on the website for you and the functionality. But it is Climate Emergency UK who run the volunteers and the methodology and the questions and all that sort of thing. So in fact, I think I'm passing over to you now, Don, and you're going to talk a bit more about Climate Emergency UK and the background to making these scorecards.
Thank you so much, Julia. My name is Don, and I'm the Outreach Director at Climate Emergency UK. And I'm joined today by Julia, who's going to be supporting me with this session for My Society. As a way of introduction, maybe I'm just going to add a few words about Climate Emergency UK and where we came from. In 2019, every council in UK started to declare the climate emergency, and our mission as an organization has been to hold council accountable for their promises to reach net zero. Back in 2019, the council's rooms were full of campaigners asking for their respective councils to declare the climate emergency. However, with time, we're now in 2023, and it's become more and more difficult to identify, ask, and secure progress against those targets. And this is why our mission is to provide the information with the support of My Society, make this information available, easy to understand, about what is currently happening and what your council is doing to tackle the climate and ecological emergencies. We set a benchmark for councils, setting what good practice looks like, and also telling councils where they could be improving. We also lobby the national government for further funding and support, as well as other national organizations support council so that they can deliver further climate action. The scorecards have just been released in October, and what we would like to achieve with these cards is twofold. We would like campaigners and local residents, just like yourself, to use them and understand where your council is doing well and where your council could be doing better, and then lobby councillors for specific and targeted improvements using our recommendations, win local changes in your local area. We also want council staff and councillors themselves to use the scorecards to understand how we can improve their climate action plans and see good practices and examples of policies that have worked elsewhere in the UK. Meanwhile, we are going to be updating the scorecards. We're looking at relaunching a new version of scorecards in 2025, in 2 years' time. And we also are working with campaigners like yourself to make sure that the scorecards are being used and the data is being fully used, both by councillors and campaigners. And the overall goal with all of this is to drive down emissions by a third, because the Climate Change Committee has, in its latest report, estimated that councils have, within their influence, they could reduce overall emission by a third. And this is what we're working towards. I'm now going to talk a bit about the methodology for scorecards. Julia's going to pop a link in the chat. So now you can access the full methodology we've published. You can even download a copy of the methodology if you want to find out more about how the scorecards came about. But I'm just going to give you a whistle tour of this process. The Council Climate Action Scorecards are an assessment of local authorities' climate action, and we've scored 7 sections in total. First section is buildings and heating, which has a lot of potential in terms of carbon reduction. And in this section, we've included both the council-owned buildings, but also local businesses and what kind of support the council can provide them, as well as social housing and the energy efficiency of those houses. The transport section includes whether councils have transitioned to an electric car fleet, taxis, buses, investment made in new road infrastructure, as well as the air quality. Planning and land use looks at local planning and regulation, the requirement for new building, whether the council is investing in fossil fuel or energy or renewable energy, and how it manages application for those projects. Governance and finance, which has the longer term implication, and that includes the climate action plans, as well as the procurement procedures and how decisions are made, as well as what level of knowledge is within the council of environmental issues. Biodiversity includes tree cover, as well as climate change adaptation and green space provision. Collaboration and engagement describes how your council engage with yourselves, local residents, and how many sections of society are involved, especially the most vulnerable and the ones who are going to be impacted by climate change the most, making sure that their voices are being taken into account. And the final section is waste reduction and food, which looks at recycling rates, as well as provision of allotments, for example, and encouraging healthy and sustainable eating. So this is a whole range of information, for which we had to gather a huge amount of data. This data was gathered from 3 different sources. We've looked at national data, like air quality, data publicly available on council websites. We've also used freedom of information requests for all 400 councils in UK. And it's with those 3 sources that we've managed to collect all of this data. The process already started in April 22, when we started to initiate the consultations and draw out some the sections, but also the questions. And we ended up designing a process which would be 3 stages to collect the information and making sure that it's the most accurate it could be. We engaged with 90 organizations between July and September 2022 to make sure that the expectation set by the scorecards were fair to the councils, and that for each and every question, there is at least one council that is scoring the full mark. And in total, there are 91 questions within those 7 sections. We published the metrics for scorecards at the end of last year. And in February of this year, we started scoring councils. And for this, we recruited 215 volunteers who have spent over 5,000 hours researching what councils do to tackle the climate emergency. We then opened a 5-week period to give council the right of reply. We shared their initial scoring with them, and we gave them the opportunity to share information that we might have missed. And following that period, we then started to audit all the scores with a smaller team of 50 highly trained volunteers and paid auditors. And that brought us to October, when we finally were able to launch the scorecards. So quite a long process and a lot of work being involved to assess every single council in the UK. If you'd like to have a look at the methodology, you'll find more details on what exactly we've been marking. You now have access to the full detail of each and every questions, including a spreadsheet which kind of takes you through all the different levels of scoring, how we develop the scoring system, how each of the questions are weighted, because obviously some actions taken by councils are more important than others, so they've been weighted differently. And also what was the criteria and what was the threshold for a council to get the full mark. But I'll leave you to do this in your own time and research. But I'm now going to move on to a much more exciting bit of this presentation, which is the results of the scorecards. And I'm now going to pass on to Julia to talk you through this bit.
Thanks so much, Don. Could you take me to the next slide? Thanks so much. So we're just going to draw out a few of the kind of headline results from the scorecards here, in that, as well as being obviously a brilliant way of each individual campaigner or person understanding their council and it being a great resource for individual councils, we think one of the key strengths of the scorecards is that it builds a national picture. We've, through this process, unlocked hundreds of new data sets that didn't exist before, and so that lets us to create a national picture, as I say, which means that we can argue for better climate action both locally and nationally. And so some of these things can happen now and local governments can do them straight away, and some of them we need more pressure and more support from national government in order to enable them. So that's the kind of context and why I'm talking about this national picture. It's worth knowing that councils on the whole are scoring low. So you can see here that we've broken this down by type of council and also by their average score and by the range in those scores. And so you can see that there are some very low scoring councils. There are also some high scoring councils. And as I demonstrate the website in a minute, you'll see that we have tried to highlight best practice and show where those high scoring councils are. On the whole, combined authorities did better than any other type of council. And again, we could look into a bit more of that and the kind of funding that's available to combined authorities. Their size and their scale means that some actions are more available to them. Whereas we see that in Northern Ireland, their councils were the lowest scoring across the board. And again, that helps us to ask important questions about why that might be. And then on to the next one, if that's okay, Don. Thanks so much. So we could also break this down by a nation. And so Scotland was the highest scoring nation. And again, we could ask questions about that, what facilitates the scoring in that country to be better. And again, Northern Ireland. It's worth, as we've noted here, bearing in mind that in Wales and Scotland, no council scored below 15%. And on that previous slide, you'd seen that there were some scores below 15% across the board. But that wasn't the case in Wales and Scotland because of their national policy requirements in the devolved nations. And so, like as I was saying earlier, like, national policy does have a real impact on what councils can achieve. So that's a bit more background there. It's also worth saying that Climate Emergency UK are putting out a report in the new year in the spring, which will go into a lot more of these kind of trends and like national pictures that are coming out. And so if you're not already on the mailing list, you should be. Great. Please could I have the next slide on? Great. And so this is, again, breaking it down in a slightly different way. We're looking at regions. You may or may not be surprised to see that London was the highest scoring region across the UK, with the Northeast being the lowest scoring. Oh, sorry, Don, I'm now losing the slides. Sorry, I could switch. Great, thanks so much. Again, this helps us paint a broader picture of where funding is going and where it's not in the country. And this helps us to make policy asks at a national level. And then finally in this part, oh, sorry, just that last slide. Sorry, yeah, the next slide, please, Don. Thank you. It is worth knowing that 41 councils did score over 50% in the scorecards, and that some councils were able to score 80% or more in several of the sections. And so, although it is low scoring on the whole, what we try to do is draw out that best practice and show that it is possible. There are councils doing this work in the country, and what we might need to look at is the facilitating factors that achieve that. And so, for example, I'm in Leeds, and there's some sections I'm going to go into in a bit in planning and land use that Leeds has done really, really well on, and then there are some that it did much worse on. And as somebody who lives in Leeds, I can now use that evidence of what we did really well on and shout about that and say, well done to the council, that was brilliant, and see where that could be applied elsewhere in the country. Whereas in the sections where it didn't do so well, I can use the website to find councils who are similar, who have taken action that scored much better, ready for next time. So yeah, I hope that's given you a bit of a sense of the overall trends and this kind of line that we're trying to make between the local and the national. I think next up, I'm going to give you a bit of a demo of the website, if that is right. Cool. So I will share my screen now. Hope that has all made sense so far. So I think we found out at the beginning that some people have used the scorecards in their campaigning and some people haven't yet. And so I just want to give you a quick demonstration of kind of how I would navigate the website, and then hopefully that will be helpful for our next section, where we will ask you to have a little look at how your council has scored. On this homepage, we've got a few useful features here, and so you can search, you can use this part in the left here to change what you're seeing in the overall table below. So at the moment we are seeing all of the single tier councils ranked by total score, but we could change that to districts. I'll just give it a second, or to combined authority. I'm going to take it back to single tier because I know that Leeds is in there. Where you see stars, that's high scoring council, so it's worth bearing that in mind across the board, as wherever you see a star, that is a high scoring council in that section. So we can see that the total score means that Westminster City Council is coming out on top, but I am going to rig this because if I go to planning and land use, I get Leeds City Council, who are my home council, which I want to celebrate. You can also go to look at the councils by section. As Dom said, there are 7 sections, and you can access that in the toolbar at the top as well. Or you could search for your individual council's scorecard by your postcode here. One thing I wanted to draw out before I get into an individual council is these really useful advanced filters. And as I was saying earlier, we might want to have a think about where there are similar councils to ours or other ways of breaking down this data, because there are so many councils to look at from the beginning. And so we've got a few ways of doing that here. So I might want to look at councils in England, other councils in Yorkshire and the Humber, if I was taking a regional approach, or I could look at the level of urbanisation of that area. So we've got urban councils, rural councils, or kind of shades along that scale. Political control as of September 2023, that might be a really interesting one for you. If you're thinking that you need to make a more political argument with your council, you could see what other councils of the same control are doing. Levels of deprivation in your council, that might be another argument. For example, if you're making an argument about air quality or housing efficiency or something that you wanted to make that case for. And then finally, population. If you're living in a council that's really, really small or one that's really, really big, you might want to filter that way. So what filters shall I do? I might be a bit boring and just say England and Yorkshire and the Humber for now, and apply those filters to single tier councils. And that gets me to other councils in my region. And you can see the real kind of range of scores here across the board. And so Kirklees Council is not very far from where I am now, or Kingston upon Hull, but the scores are wildly different. And so I think we've really unlocked a lot of new data here. I'm going to now take you to look at an individual council page. And I am going to choose Leeds because that's where I am today. And there's a bit of interesting information at the top here that you might have missed as well. And so we're just laying that out here, which hopefully is useful. You can have a look here at some of the methodological factors. And then here is Leeds's individual council page. Just to explain this a bit, we are giving out some penalty points this year, and that's in categories where councils have done something that is particularly climate negative. And so it might be a road expansion or building airports, advancing airports and that sort of thing. You can get into more detail as you go through. So let's have a look here. I can see that Leeds was particularly high scoring in planning and land use, and so that is brilliant. They've got a star next to that, and I can see where they've got their scores. I'd always encourage you to have a look at these sections. How is this marked? Because you can see whether it was a research mark or whether it was an FOI. The question weights, that's how important we thought it was in the grand scheme of things. And this, I think, is one of the most useful features of scorecards, is the evidence. So we have always, where we have evidence for why councils did or did not get the point, we have linked it there. And also, if you'd like an explanation of the methodology of this particular question, you can have that in the criteria part. And then just drawing your attention to this right side here, I think this helps get a sense of things too. So Leeds got a point here, which was, and they were only one of 44 out of 186 councils to do that. And so they did a good job there. Whereas if your council perhaps didn't get a point there and the majority of councils did, then that might be something that you could use in your conversation with your councils. A really new feature that I'd like to highlight, which I think is particularly exciting, is that we have recently released brand new question pages. And so you can now choose a particular question that you're interested in, and that will show you how many councils got across the range of points. So there's up to 3 points, I think, in some of the questions. And so it will give you that breakdown here. But it will then also show them from high to low. And so that gives you the opportunity to look at this evidence from high scoring councils. So maybe this is a bad choice in that Leeds did well in this, but let's have a look. If we go back to Leeds, I could find their lowest scoring section. So Leeds' lowest scoring section was transport, and it didn't get a point for, I mean, clean air zones is a bit of a tricky one. Maybe we'll go for a workplace parking levy. So Leeds didn't get the point here, but we can see that, okay, only one council did, but it was Nottingham, and that has given us a link to where in the Nottingham city. Oh, bad example, I should have checked that one. We might need to update that link there, but it's just to show that in this case, that is where you would go to find the evidence for those pages. So I think that is probably all of the demonstrating of the website to do for now. I hope that made sense. I should go back, and we have time to show you one where the link did work. Sorry, there's always going to be the way when we've got over nearly 400 councils and so many questions. But I think that was a quick run through for now to keep us going. I'll just see questions in the chat. Oops, sorry. What have I done there? Great.
I think we're good with questions.
Great. Sorry, someone's just asked, can I show how we access the questions page? You can do that from an individual council's page, or you can do it from sections. You just have to click on the question where you see a question. You can click on the question itself, and that will be a URL to that. Great. So what I wanted to talk you through next is we have a really brilliant document that Don might have already posted in the chat or is about to, which is called 15 Ways to Improve Your Council's Climate Action Plan. And as I've kind of demonstrated there is so much data that has been released through the scorecards, but we've pulled out a few of these questions, which are really brilliant asks of your council. And here we focused on asks that are free or somewhat easier than others to ask your council to do, because we do really recognise the very complicated funding situation that many councils are in. You might have seen in the news that the situation is quite dire in lots of places, but there are still things that councils are able to do. And so we have a whole document that outlines these, but I thought I would just highlight a few here. Some of it, and one that we're particularly interested in my society because we are all about open data, is making sure that the information that they do have, both about what they are doing and what they are offering to citizens in terms of climate action, is available to citizens. And so if you've ever tried to navigate your council's website, we have obviously through the process of doing this had to navigate a lot. You'll know that it's often really, really buried and hard to find. And so so something that you could ask your council to do is making that information much more accessible. Carbon literacy training for all staff and councillors, again, is relatively low cost and is something that just will make them more confident in approaching this topic, which we think is really important. Community energy buy-in scheme, action plans having smart targets. Again, obviously we're really interested in not just the reason that we in not just making the plans, but making sure that they get delivered. And so smart targets are a key part of that. Climate conscious decision making. So is climate change considered in all parts of the council's planning and decision making? Changing their vehicle fleet to electric, that will have to happen eventually, and can that happen sooner in the council's planning? You could maybe bump that up their priority list. Residents and stakeholders are being involved, and so we are really interested in making sure that the public and the community are part of council's decision making. People need to be brought along on this journey, we think. Councils using renewable energy both in their own operations and in the wider area, and then a car sharing scheme would be a great example. There's just the remaining 6, I think, on the next slide. I will just check the chat. Oh, thanks for putting that in there. And yeah, thanks for putting those answers in the chat, everybody. Again, a slightly complicated one, but within at least the council's own portfolio, they can decide on the energy efficiencies of the homes that they build in future. And we want those to be net zero. They will have to be eventually. Vegetarian school meals, there's some great campaigning on this going on already that you could join in with if you're not already. Life cycle assessments for developments. And so this is the carbon releases and the environmental impact of homes over their entire life cycle, not just in the building process. Stopping the use of pesticides in council-owned spaces, banning single-use plastics, and then again, mowing less. There is much more information on all of these in the document that Don has kindly linked into the chat. But hopefully that's got you thinking about some things that you could be talking to your councils about, and you now have a brilliant data source to back it up. That's the idea. Brill, I think I'll pass back to you, Don.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'd really recommend you having a read through this document. It really give you some ideas on what you could ask your council to do. And just to reiterate a point that we selected those 15 actions because we believe that they are the easiest and the lowest cost actions that council can take, and they all have significant impacts. We're now going to move on to a more interactive section of this call. So we're going to enter into breakout room in which we're going to be discussing, we're going to be introducing you to the other people in the room and asking them maybe where they're from, what their local council is, and then if you can, open the council scorecard website and check the 2 following actions. Has your local council rolled out carbon literacy training to all their councillors and staff? And does your council have a climate plan with smart targets? So if you can, please have a look on the website and see if you can find this information, and you'll be in a group. So we can all support each other and see if we can. And then if you have the time to discuss those results and assign someone to report back to the group. So I will now pause the recording, and Julia will open the breakout room for 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Confident on. So our last section is about how to use the scorecards. Hopefully you feel a bit more confident on understanding the scorecards yourself, although it really is something to spend a bit of time and click through and understand the different data sets and things that we have going on there. We've got a few different ways now in this next section that you might want to take your newfound knowledge and talk to other people in your area about it. And so the first thing to say is that we do have a Scorecards media pack, which has social media templates for any avid tweeters in the room or anyone who's loving social media. But we also have tips and templates for press releases. And we would really encourage you to try and engage with your local or even national media about this. There's been loads of pickup of the Scorecards so far. I think it is a really interesting story because it does make that local to national link. And I think regional newspapers have been really interested in how their local region compares to the national picture. And so please do check out the links in that media pack that Don has posted there. There's lots in there. And hopefully that will make the process of sending a press release a bit easier. And then the next one, which is particularly interesting to me, if we could have the next slide, sorry, Don, I'm asking a lot for you, also posting the chat, is thinking about talking to your council directly and just thinking about how to frame these kind of conversations. So as we've talked a little bit about already, you might want to think about which section is their poorest and which section is their best, and then using the new question feature to find out if you can at the same time link them to some evidence of how they could improve that, of where there is best practice taking place in the country. Questions that neighbouring councils have done well on. Again, you could have a look at that region filter to see where in your local area there are other councils doing good work. You might want to have a particular look at those 15 improvements that we talked about earlier, the ones that are a little bit more cheap or easy to implement, and then briefly who has the power and how can you influence them? So if you haven't engaged with your council before, you might want to, alongside doing this research on the scorecards, think about who in the council you would like to talk to. So everybody has a ward councillor and at least one ward councillor, and you can find out who your ward councillors are using another website that My Society builds called Write to Them, which I've put in the chat, but it's not coming up as a link, so maybe somebody like Serena would do that for me. And that will show you who your ward councillors are, but also on your council website you'll probably be able to find thank you information about who is the cabinet member or the portfolio holder for the environment. So those are probably the people that you want to connect with, your ward councillors who are your most local representative, but also the person who has the responsibility for the environment. And you could present any number of some of this stuff that we're talking about tonight to them. I'd always encourage, if you can, to go and meet them in person and have a human conversation, because I think that helps progress. But you might be busy, but maybe come January, you could spend a bit of time. I know Christmas is a busy time. Great, and then I think the last slide on this section, if I'm remembering that right, there's one more, which is to say that with a bit more information about all of this sort of thing and what I've been saying about cabinet member for the environment and how councils work and all of that sort of thing, there is a dedicated document resource called the Campaigner's Guide to the Scorecards. And so that talks about asking a question in a council meeting, which isn't an automatically obvious thing to know how to do or how that happens, getting in touch with your local councillor, a bit of advice on holding a public event. One thing that we see time and time again is that if you can demonstrate the public mandate and that more than just, climate campaigners care about this and that there are other people in your communities, then that works really well. And then, a bit more guidance on how to communicate with your councillor. I'm already running over and I need to pass to Don to do the wrap up.
Thank you so much, Julia. I don't know how you managed to do this. I just wanted to share something else with you. We are currently recruiting volunteers to host local conversation. Something that came out in breakout room is the need for local knowledge. So we would welcome new volunteers to host presentations within their local communities. I've just popped the expression of interest form in this chat. So if you want to receive these slides, as well as further support and training to host scorecard sessions, please do sign up and I'll be in touch. Another thing before we're now hit the 6:30 march, so I'll be around if you have any questions. But before you leave, if you could please submit some feedback, I would really appreciate it. Your feedback helps us improve, and it only takes 5 minutes to complete it. So for those of you who have to leave just now, I would just like to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope it has helped you understand the scorecards. And we really look forward to having you again at our next events next year. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. Well, Julia and I are going to stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions. But thank you so much, and have a nice evening to everyone who needs to head off just now. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone.